into the vital topic of workplace wellbeing and how we can go beyond offering wellbeing benefits and solutions to achieving the much harder challenge of creating an organisational culture that genuinely prioritises the well-being of all its employees. We'll be exploring why staying well and healthy at work still feels so difficult for so many people, and what's required to create a culture of well-being, and where the balance of responsibility for well-being lies. I'm joined by Khushboo Patel, who I'm delighted to invite into the recording studio today, and she's a leading voice in workplace culture and well-being.
Hi, hello.
Hello, hi. I was going to go on to say a little bit more about all your brilliant accolades, so give me 2 ticks and then we'll do a proper hello. With her background in corporate and commercial banking, Khushboo recently led the culture, well-being, engagement and diversity and inclusion agenda at Metro Bank. She was named Diversity Lead of the Year at the Women in Finance Awards 2023 and is in The Guardian's top 10 heads of diversity in the global diversity list. Didn't want to miss those nuggets out, Khushboo. Welcome to the pod.
Thank you so much, Helen. Thank you. That's a lovely introduction.
Oh, I must admit, you're very welcome. I'm delighted we've found a date to make this happen.
Absolutely.
And looking forward to just chatting with you really about all things wellbeing related and where we're at with that in the world of work and what's difficult and where we're seeing progress and how to make progress. But I don't know about you. As you know, I'm just back from 3.5 weeks in Australia, so I'm feeling quite well at the moment, if a little mentally distracted by holiday memories. But yeah, how are you doing on this spring day?
Oh, very well, very well. It's not very spring today in South Wales. The clouds are around, but it's dry, so that's absolutely fine. But I am very well, thank you.
Oh, well, we're lucky. It poured with rain all weekend, and we've got blue sky today. So
Oh, perfect.
I'm really loving that. So we are chatting about well-being at work, and I guess some people listening to us might have some kind of formal responsibility for this in their organisations, but
Yeah.
obviously everyone's concerned about this topic from our own point of view as individuals, juggling whatever work throws at us and our careers, but also whatever's important to us in our home lives as well. Um, Given the roles you've had, and I know the many conversations you have with organisations and other wellbeing
Mm.
experts, how would you describe the state of well-being in the world of work at the moment?
It's a really interesting one because it's something that's talked about now more than it ever has been, and that's great. Just having the buzz around talking about well-being and work is great. I think there's almost two schools of thought on it. There's people who talk about it and genuinely want to make a difference, which is great, which is what organisations absolutely should be doing. And then there's the other side that hear about the buzzword and quickly want to, obtain an accolade or make that change quickly. And I think the danger there is that, well, going from medium or not so great well-being to positive well-being, it's a cultural change. And cultural change always takes time. So it's not, here you go, here's a webinar, or here's some free fruit in your office, off you go, you're now all well. It doesn't work that way because well-being has got so many depths to it. And actually, if you think about it, it's been around for years and years and years. It's why we do desk safety assessments when we're sitting at a desk. It's why we have to take breaks or should be taking breaks when we're looking at the screen. And it's easier to think about sometimes in terms of physical well-being. I think what's newer and what's giving more of a spotlight, which is absolutely right, is the things that you can't see. So particularly mental well-being, the things that are hidden away from the workplace, like financial well-being. Throughout the pandemic, different things have happened. So social well-being's become quite highlighted. And lots of changes in the world, like I mentioned, financial well-being, this cost of living crisis, how does that impact your colleagues? And it brings about there's one person, there's not a work person and there's not a home person, it's everything. I remember quite early on in my career the concepts of you bring yourself to work and leave everything else at the door. Well, that's not quite how it works, because you can't just switch that part of your brain off, can you? You're always thinking about things that impact you, and actually the things that might be negatively impacting your well-being, you you particularly can't switch off. It's the way we're wired. We come into work and we will be thinking about the things that we might not, in inverted commas, supposed to be thinking about,
Mm.
and it throws people off their game. So it's in the employer's best interest to really be looking at well-being, and the fact that it's been talked about so much now, I think it's great.
Yeah, I love the way you describe that, that shift in what is being talked about. And I'm thinking back to, the early days of my career where, to be honest, even though I worked for a very supportive, forward-thinking employer, well-being broadly consisted of an employee assistance program,
Yeah.
medical benefits, and paid sickness absence. And that was kind of it. There wasn't any strategy that I was aware of or any other programs. And now fast forward to today, and like you just talked about, partly because of the pandemic, but also for cost of living crises and energy bills, etc. There's so much more that's come into the conversation around financial well-being and social well-being. And then I guess again with the growth in understanding around diversity and inclusion, that whole,
Mhm.
actually we're humans with
Yeah.
home lives coming into work. We're not just machines that drop all kind of our broader context at the door, as you say. It's much more multifaceted, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely is. And it all links into each other. And there's, this proper study, scientific research that shows that if a person is happy in all aspects of their life, and this concept of happiness for well-being is really key. I've been doing a lot of learning around that. And if you're happy in other aspects of your life, that feeds into you being happier at work. And then when you're happy at work, you're feeling well, you're more productive, and your employer benefits, things like better productivity, better innovation, better creativity. And so we think about well-being as a concept, and there's results that don't perhaps come automatically. And I say this about looking at well-being and diversity and inclusion, that it becomes a poor business decision if you don't focus on it with an authentic way. Because if you focus on it on just a performative way and just a pretend way, it actually has a negative impact on your colleagues'
Mm.
well-being. Because there's all this headline about it's okay, you can talk about it, and then when you go and talk about it, it's not welcomed. Or there has to be synergies between everything that you do. They can't be, here's a series of healthy eating webinars, but by the way, all our vending machines, which that's all you've got time to go and get, has crisps and chocolate in
Mm.
it. Or here's some information about sleeping well, but by the way, the last 4 months you've been working, late until the evening. Or make sure you go out for a walk at lunchtime, but here's an hour and a half learn and lunch type of thing. And it becomes expected, and those two things don't marry up. You're having one
Mm.
message and another message, and you just mentioned that it's multifaceted. It's got to be a wider synergy, which is why a strategy needs to be put into place. It's not just something that you can pick up and go, here you go, run with it.
Yeah.
It needs to filter into all other aspects.
Yes. So I'm hearing, the companies or organisations that might have just been dipping their toes into well-being tend to go for just very piecemeal
Yeah.
solutions and hope that'll do the trick, and then presumably discover at some point that's not really creating any meaningful change, and then perhaps move on to having a well-being strategy and a multifaceted program, and that's really positive progress. But I guess the big challenge from what you're saying is actually how to go from having things that you're offering to people to support them with their well-being to actually making sure that people's day-to-day experience of work is one that helps them manage their well-being and marries up with the formal policies and benefits that are on offer.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's far more complex than it seems
Mm.
on the outside, because you've got to unpick. Quite often there's sort of systemic behaviors and systemic cultures that don't lead to good well-being. And I know you and I have had conversations many a times around, particularly gender equality and females at senior leadership, and how systems are created, and not by us now, years and years ago. And it's unpicking several things. So, I'm not being harsh on an organization to say that, these are just piecemeal things, they're not going to work, but they've got to unpick all of the stuff
Yeah.
that they're doing around it. And it becomes dangerous because, no organization says, by the way, our colleagues have poor well-being, or by the way, we have a bad culture, or we don't want to focus on well-being. Nobody says that. And it's only your colleagues that are able to tell you that, but they're not going to tell you if you haven't created a safe environment. So it's a bit of a catch-22, because you're telling your colleagues and they might be saying, yeah, 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 we're fine. You need to be asking yourself, is that actually true? And this isn't about colleagues, lying or not telling the truth. You've got to create that safety,
Mm.
because quite often, if you're saying, actually, organisation, you're doing something wrong, it takes courage. And those organisations that allow that courage to speak up and come forth are those that have the psychologically safe culture. Now, it's a bit of a buzzword, another buzzword, psychological safety, psychological safety, psychological safety. It's not a noun, it's a feeling. It's a verb, it's something that you create. So you can't go, here you go, here's my psychologically safe culture. And you as a leader can't say you do that unless your colleagues are feeling it. And you need to get under that true feeling. Um, and so many times I've seen organizations make the mistake of, potentially colleague surveys or some kind of listening mechanism, and they pick up the results and they don't want to do anything about the results, or they pick up the results and they still don't believe the results. So, for example, we're burnt out, we're feeling stress at work, we're under resourced. Oh yeah, but that's always the case. So that can't be it. What's the magic wand?
Mm.
And there is no magic wand. It's your colleagues are literally telling you, and sometimes it might be things that you don't want to hear. And you've got to be open enough to be able to say, right, if our colleagues are saying they're close to burnout, what's happening here? We've got to make some changes. And unfortunately, it sometimes only takes a big event or a big thing
Mm.
to happen for someone to change the way they do things. Sometimes that doesn't even change things. Something happens and everyone's like, yeah, okay, this is really sad, it shouldn't have happened, but you deviate to the same way because it's always been done that way. And
Yeah.
yeah, it's tough.
Yeah, it is. You covered so much there that I'd love to dig into, from like social expectations,
Mm,
those systemic expectations. I know we've chatted before about a lot of this is wrapped up in society's expectations of gender roles, but also things like, what success looks like.
yeah.
And also, it's quite wrapped up in our own sense of identity, isn't it?
Yeah.
What success and achievement or a fulfilling work life looks like to each of us. And I think we're all quite guilty, probably. I know I am anyway, of I might really enjoy my work, but
Mm.
sometimes there'll be a nagging voice in my head that's saying, you're not taking enough care of yourself. You need to,
Oh,
switch things up a little bit, look at your
absolutely.
boundaries again, say no to more stuff. And we were just talking off air about those little red flags that we
Yeah.
somehow manage to ignore, for all sorts of reasons. Maybe
Yeah.
because it's just easier, frankly, than trying to make a change. But yeah, what's your view on that, about kind of expectations we set ourselves and expectations in society and stuff?
I always say it's different when it's yourself. And people, you should lead with, you shouldn't lead with do as I say, not as I do. But it's so easy to fall into the theory of take regular breaks, look after yourself, look after your mental health, speak up if you don't feel safe psychologically, speak up about anything, get involved in all these extra things that are going to fulfill your life, but it's okay because work is only a part of it. When you're in the midst of it as yourself and these flags come along, you tell yourself different things. And it's very easy to read a story to go, oh, well, someone should have said something about this, but nobody does.
Mm.
Nobody does. How many times have people excused poor behavior towards themselves, whilst if it was a friend or family, you would stand there front line and centre going, no, that's not acceptable. I know I do it, and I know I'm guilty of it. The amount of times I've set alarms on my phone to go, right, take a break, if it's just to get up and just take a short walk or something, alarm will go off, or press ignore or press snooze. I'll block out my calendar time to go, this is my lunch time. Oh, but somebody sent a meeting. Oh, it's fine. I'll just ignore that. I'll do it later. and it never becomes a thing, and you ignore all these red flags because, you know, for various reasons, and I can't speak on behalf of everyone that does, but, you know, perhaps actually if I pedal a little bit faster, I'll be seen, or I will get a promotion, or I will feel better and more accomplished, because actually, if I'm doing four people's job in one, somebody will see that and notice that, and it's going to help my career, because that's what's ingrained. You know, you work harder, you do what nobody else does, and you get seen and you get promoted and you're on the corporate ladder, which, you know, particularly for a woman, great, it's ambitious. But by the way, I can also do it all because I'm also CEO of the house, because, you know, I do all the planning and the childcare and all of that kind of stuff. And it becomes a real juggle, and only those doing the juggle understand the juggle. And then the other thing, and lots of people have told me this, is you don't speak up, because if you speak up, it comes across as a weakness. And this is it's a real problem, I think, in creating psychological safety and leadership traits, that vulnerability is not used enough. People don't like to say, I'm not doing this anymore because it's not good for my health and I'm stepping away. Like, you know, the fantastic example, I know you were just in Australia, but the New Zealand former Prime Minister,
Yeah, Jacinda Ardern. Yeah.
absolutely brilliant example of showing vulnerability and doing the right thing. But how many times is that duplicated in the workplace? And it's not.
Mm.
It, you know, you get emails from leaders outside of hours, and then you think, right, automatically your brain thinks, right, someone senior sent me an email, I've got to send it at this time, 10 o'clock at night, whatever it is. And I remember you and I have spoken about time intelligence, and, you know, just writing little things on the bottom of a signature saying, I might be emailing at this time, it works for me, but it might not work for you, you know, that kind of thing. And being vulnerable to say that, right, I'm stopping now because I've had two or three meetings, my brain is fuzzled, I'm going for a walk, or I'm taking the morning out because I'm going to the sports day, because actually that connection to my child is really, really important. That's not talked about openly, and not enough. And when it is, it's interesting because you get quite often gender stereotypes. A man does it, and oh God, isn't he amazing? Dad going to the sports day, mum does it. Oh, it's a
She's
childcare.
slacking.
Yeah, you see, if she gets a promotion, you know what, this will happen all the time.
Mm.
And you think, that's not an organization. That's not the society we live in today. That is a series of things and expectations over years and years and years that need unpicking. And it all
Yeah.
feeds into well-being. Because as a woman, if you're thinking, I want to show up for my child, but I'm also capable of showing up for work, and then you having to think of the excuses on both sides, you know, the guilt of parenting, and then the guilt of saying to work, actually, I'm taking a couple of hours out, knowing full well that at that time you've probably already worked double the week that you're supposed to. It becomes a difficult thing, a really difficult thing.
Yeah. And even if, you know, there aren't children in your life, that ability to say, no, I've done enough
Yeah.
hours and I need some downtime to go to the gym, see a friend, you
Yeah,
know, sit and watch Netflix with a box of chocolates, whatever it
absolutely.
is, but prioritize me rather than work.
100%. And you've made
Mm.
a really important point there. It doesn't need to be an excuse. So it doesn't need to be because I have children in my life or because I have people to care for in my
Mm.
life. The person to care for is yourself. So actually, if you want to pull back to say, I need time for this, it's a really important thing. I remember very early on in my career that it was always that any kind of annual leave, if you put in a request for annual leave, it would go across the team and the people with children could veto it. And I remember
Wow.
thinking, oh, it was just a normal thing. It was just a normal thing. And I remember thinking, oh, well, that's a bit annoying. But actually, looking back then now, like, why are we placing different expectations of value on people's time?
Yeah,
Because everyone's time is important, you know, and
absolutely.
everybody should have the opportunity to look after themselves, and we should be supporting that,
Yeah.
not trying things to get away from that, or creating a hierarchy where it really doesn't need a hierarchy. We have enough of that in life.
Yeah, yeah. So to the question of so who's responsible or for which aspects of well-being, I guess as individuals, we're responsible for paying attention to our own
Mm.
well-being, looking out for those red flags, not ignoring them, and speaking up, right, when however hard and uncomfortable that feels, but saying no, I don't want to be, I don't want to do that call on my non-working day, I don't want to be doing that in the evening. And that feels really, really hard when the expectation is everyone else is
Yeah.
going to do it. I guess if you're the manager of a team, if you manage others, the responsibility is on you to be talking to them regularly about how they're doing, not just how the work's going, or what the work is, but how they're feeling in delivering that, and being a really great listener. Asking open questions and listening well. And then to your earlier point, if you're leading in a position of leadership, it's being really attentive, well, asking questions more formally through measurement, right,
Mm.
and listening conversations, but then really getting curious about why people are coming back with the answers they're coming, and not just slightly brushing them under the table or saying, oh well, that's similar to last year's, so that we don't need to worry too much. It hasn't got worse. But I know lots and lots of leaders care passionately about
Mm.
well-being, but it's a bit like trying to shift a super tanker. There isn't always one single answer if you know that there's an issue. But yeah, so it sounds very tricky. So if you're listening to this, someone's listening to this and they are in a kind of position of authority, or they're leading a team or a business, what can they usefully pay attention to? What are some of the ingredients if they're
Mm.
thinking, okay, how do I go about improving the culture of well-being here?
Mm.
What are the things I have to pay attention to? What would be your, I don't know, 3 or 4 things, and big things, maybe small things in the pot that they might pay attention to?
Yeah, absolutely. I think like the very first thing, and I might get sort of eye rolls, is creating that culture of psychological safety. And it is a buzz sentence, it's a buzzword, but really work hard on doing that. And there's so many different elements to that. That's a whole, another podcast on creating a psychological safe culture. But where there's safety, colleagues will feel heard. They will feel that if things aren't right, they can actually say that things aren't right. And you have to really tune into your colleagues to get to the bottom of this, which is what that's the second piece of advice is: listen to colleagues. However that is, listen to colleagues. So, if you've got an organization with surveys, listen to them. If you've got a smaller business, and actually that listening is just by picking up the feedback. And there's so many mechanisms of
Mm,
listening. It doesn't have to be this formal big survey. If you've got them, great. Have a focus group, have a meeting.
yeah.
In the meeting, what are you seeing? What are you hearing? What are you not hearing? Because actually what you're not hearing is really important, because when you're in a room and everyone's nodding and you come out going, yeah, that's absolutely brilliant, everyone agrees with what I've said, that's a dangerous situation, because there might be the lack of psychological safety there, because you come away going, yeah, everyone's agreed with what I've said, but there might be people thinking, well, I'm not gonna be the one who's saying that I don't agree with that, because I've heard so and so gets very defensive, or I'm not being torn down in front of a room if somebody says that. And how do you know if you don't allow your colleagues that space to speak up for what they believe in and what they think is true? So tune into what colleagues say, create that culture. When you're looking at well-being, be deliberate about well-being. So, if somebody comes to you to say, look, I want to put in this well-being program, whether it's webinars or whether it's inviting yoga sessions, and whatever it is, take it. By all means, all of this stuff makes part of a bigger well-being jigsaw puzzle, but put that jigsaw puzzle together well. Don't just leave the pieces scrawled around. Where does that fit into the rest of it? So if we're doing a series of lunchtime yoga sessions, what is that going to achieve for your office? Does that involve everybody? And are you looking at other parts of it? And this is where things like inclusion come into play. Fit other parts of the organization into what you're trying to achieve. And that's where you develop a wellbeing strategy. And I can't talk about that enough. Developing a wellbeing strategy is important, because this will plug into your business strategy. Where you've got your business strategy, there should be a strand around people, and where those people fit in, you've got to look after your people. It's not, it's actually the law, so you have to do it. We've got HSE
Mm.
management regulations, you've got to do it. But it's also a good business decision. I mentioned some of the things earlier that you can get from good well-being, so you should make it part of your strategy. And when you formulate this strategy, don't just make it a corporate headline. Have actions under it and how you're going to achieve it. Put the short, medium, long term goals, because this is a long game. You're not going to change it overnight. We talked about it. It's an oil tanker. When you're changing cultures, you've got to be able to put in those short term things to go, right, at the end of this quarter, we will have done this, and then we'll do a sense check with our colleagues. What does that look like? Now, how do we change the strategy according to what our colleagues are saying? Your colleagues are your gold mine of information. Listen to them, let them develop the strategy with you, and build that psychological safety in your organisation.
Yeah, fantastic. Some really great advice there about being very intentional, being very strategic about it, but
Mm,
really focusing primarily, at first at least, on that culture of safety and
yeah.
listening to people. And then I guess there are other things that organizations can put in place in terms of building blocks that support or enable a well-being culture, like thinking about the policies and support for people who are caregivers in some
Mm,
way, and making sure that's not aimed just at women but
yeah.
at men as well. It's kind of not a gendered support, but also looking at job design and workload. I mean, there's so much that I see around overload.
Yeah.
um, and I saw Deloitte's Women at Work report for this year
Yeah.
pop out last week, I think, or in recent weeks. And,
Yeah.
it's very stark. I mean, obviously, that just focuses on women, but in terms of women's well-being, if they did overtime regularly versus didn't do overtime regularly, it was immensely higher,
Mhm.
like 2 to 3 times higher their well-being if they weren't constantly doing overtime. And that's not even taking account of the CEO of the home, or home and domestic responsibilities that I know men do share as well, but often to a lesser extent. So yeah, thank you for all that great advice. And I guess, if someone's listening and thinking, well, it does feel really hard to challenge,
Yeah.
what's expected of me around being available or working at a fast pace or making sacrifices, around my own time or what I would view as family time, work's encroaching on all of that. What advice do you have for them as an individual?
I think you touched upon it, on whose responsibility it is. And as difficult as it is, you've got to use that oxygen mask analogy. Put your own oxygen mask on first, because you can't look after, whether it's at work or at home, you can't look after others around you unless you look after yourself. And it's a really difficult thing to take in and understand, because I mentioned, when you're in the middle of it, you don't think that there's a problem. And so take the time to almost step out and take check of where you are and how you feel, and actually what is it that's going to help you. And you might be somebody that just needs to sit and think about it. You might be somebody that needs to go through a process. I've seen this fantastic thing where you sort of write down your 6 values, what's important to you, and there's no right or wrong in this. What are the 6 things that are really important to you, and put them in sort of a spoke, and then judge them out of 1 to 10 where you are on them. And that will show you the areas that you need to work on to fulfill yourself and your well-being. And actually, if you do that, just acknowledging it and knowing that is half of the battle.
Mm,
And when you know that, if you're not in a psychologically safe place, then maybe you need to think about not being in that place. And, we talked off air about this. It's very, very difficult where you've got responsibilities, right? Not everyone has the luxury of going, right, I'm going to quit my job tomorrow to do something else. But you can create a plan for yourself to pull yourself out of a situation that you're not safe in. Because if you're not safe to put your hand up and say, actually, I need help in these areas, and you're not going to get supported, that's not the right place for you. Your responsibility to do it. Yes, the organization has a responsibility to provide all the tools. The managers and leadership must show that you're empowered to use all these tools for well-being. But if that doesn't exist, that's not going to be something that you can change on your own.
Yeah.
And so you've got to look after yourself and almost have the courage and be brave to do the right things for you.
Yeah, that's such good advice. Thank you, and I know very heartfelt.
Mhm.
We've come to the end of our time chatting together. I think we could go on for ages, or we could go deeper into psychological safety and all that, and maybe we'll have a future conversation around that. But thank you so much for sharing your experience and wisdom around this question of how we approach well-being at work. What's the responsibility of the organisation, people in positions of leadership there, what's our own responsibility, and how can we, what are the things we need to do to move towards a healthier work culture generally, not just an exhausting burnout culture with a load of nice well-being webinars and programs on the side. So thanks so much. It's been a total pleasure speaking to you. If people want to get in touch professionally, what's the best way for them to do that?
Please connect with me on LinkedIn, send me a message. I'd be more than happy to chat all things wellbeing with you.
Brilliant, thank you. I'll pop the link to your LinkedIn profile in the show notes. And yeah, it's been wonderful chatting. Thanks so much, Khushboo.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Helen. Thank you.